Alright, what's happening, y'all? It's your boy Rico from Street Scores, and there are sources that are saying defensive tackle Daron Payne could be traded for a day 2 pick. So should the Commanders trade him before the trade deadline? Should we go ahead and pay him long term? What's the best case scenario? What's the worst case scenario? Can we afford to pay all of our defensive linemen? And of course, we can also run through some scenarios, because there was even an article by a Dallas Cowboys reporter that said that they could maybe try to trade for Daron Payne and William Jackson at the same time for a nice package. So we're going to look at all of the reports that are going around the league. We're going to take a look at what Daron Payne has done for the Commanders so far in his career and what he's done so far this season. He's actually playing more snaps per game this season than he ever has in his Commanders career. How does Phidarian Mathis affect our chances of trading away Daron Payne? So we got to dive into everything revolving around this situation. But before we do, make sure you subscribe to the channel, hit the bell next to the subscription button so you get notification immediately. And every time I release an informative and opinionated video just like this one, make sure you pull up every Sunday, every game day for the live play-by-play breakdown analysis of every Commanders regular season game right on this YouTube channel. Make sure you pull up every Sunday. I break down everything that's going on live, defensive line, offensive line, all of the players, everything. Of course, we're gonna laugh a lot. If we're losing, we're gonna cry some as well, but no matter what, we're gonna laugh. So make sure you pull up every Sunday for some fun. The chat is always chaotic, man. And without further ado, let's get it. Alright, so today, Dolph Kleeman tweeted out NFL teams have expressed interest in trading for Commanders defensive tackle Daron Payne. So there's clearly a market out there. There are probably multiple teams that are calling the Commanders about, hey man, do you want to trade him? Getting towards the trade deadline, that's the most value you can get for him. That trade deadline is crazy. Maybe draft day is the only thing relatively close, but if you're trying to trade away a veteran and get as much value back in return as possible, leading up to the trade deadline is literally the best time to trade a guy like a Daron Payne to a potential Super Bowl contender. There's going to be a team out there that feels like, man, we may just be a Daron Payne away from being like a true Super Bowl contender. So they're going to be a little bit more desperate and willing to give up more value around this time than they would be during the offseason. Because during the offseason, even if you feel like you have a really good team, who knows? But at this point in the season, if you're 7-0, 6-1, even 5-2, and you feel like Daron Payne is that last missing piece, there's definitely a team out there that's going to be willing to give up more for him right now than they would at any other scenario. So if there is a time to trade him, is now. But going back to the tweet, he said the 6'3", 320-pound former first-round pick from Alabama has 18 career sacks, and people with knowledge of the market believe he could net a 2023 second-day pick. And remember, second day includes rounds 2 and 3. Me personally, I'm not accepting a 3 for Daron Payne. I mean, let's go ahead and get this out the way. Me personally, the ultimate goal is to pay him long term, but we're gonna dive into that later. But at the same time, I'm not accepting anything less than a second, honestly. And just a few days ago, literally 2 days ago, Ben Standig, a Washington Commanders reporter, said a source with knowledge to trade negotiations says the Commanders could potentially get a 2023 second or third round pick for Daron Payne. So he said this days ago, and he's been the subject of trade calls for months now. Even going back to the draft, I thought we were going to trade him even before we drafted Phidarian Mathis. But after we drafted Phidarian Mathis, I was like, oh yeah, Daron Payne's going to end up going for something. I thought we were literally going to trade Daron Payne immediately after the Phidarian Mathis pick in the second round for maybe like a potential later second round pick. And honestly, whether or not the Commanders are willing to trade him completely depends on like how much winning we're doing right now. Right now, we're on a 2-game win streak with 3-4. We're trying to fight for a spot in the playoffs, maybe like a wild card spot or something like that. And Daron Payne is a very important piece for that. Without Daron Payne, I'm not exactly sure if it makes a difference in wins or losses total, but he definitely gives our team a far better chance of winning games for the remainder of this season than if we were to trade him somewhere else. He makes a strong impact for this team for sure. Now, when we started losing, we're starting to look like, oh yeah, we might as well just go ahead and be sellers leading up to the trade deadline. Get rid of William Jackson for whatever you can get for him, Daron Payne or whoever. Again, I've always been in the boat of keep Daron Payne long term, but I was starting to see why the Commanders could feel like, all right, this season's probably over. Carson Wentz is hurt. Who knows what Heineke's going to go do out there. Again, this is me speaking before this 2-game win streak, especially this most recent game against the Packers. And so it was definitely looking like, okay, when we were 1-4, it was like, yeah, man, maybe just going to go ahead and get what we can from Daron Payne while his value was at its highest. Because again, like I've already explained, leading up to the trade deadline, that's the most trade value you're going to get in return for a veteran, point blank, period. And of course, all of this is happening. All of these, should we trade Daron Payne? Should we keep Daron Payne? Stuff is going on because he is in the final year of his rookie contract. He's set to hit free agency at the end of the 2022 NFL season. Remember, we just gave Jonathan Allen a deal worth $18 million a year last summer. And then of course, it looks like we're probably going to try to pay Montez Sweat, who Pro Football Focus feels like is our best defensive player on the team right now. And then Chase Young, when he comes back, if he's as good as we hope, we're going to try to pay him long term as well. And I mean, I know there's this thought out there that you can't pay all of the defensive linemen. I think you could potentially if you really want to, but I can see why if you pay 3 of them long term and then you try to have like a cheaper option, say like a Fedarian Mathis as your 4th one, and then you let Daron Payne go somewhere else. Now, of course, I don't want to let Daron Payne walk for free, like just in free agency, because at best we will get a 3rd round compensatory pick for him. So if we're gonna trade him for at least a 2nd rounder, in my opinion. But again, like I keep saying, I prefer to keep him long term. But right now he's playing out the 2022 NFL season in his contract year, his 5th year option worth $8.53 million. So he's not going to take anything less than that per year. Again, Jonathan Allen's making 18 per year, so I'm guessing he's probably looking for at least 15, because Jonathan Allen has made the Pro Bowl. He's been the one getting all of the accolades, so maybe Daron Payne doesn't necessarily have as much leverage to ask for more money, but Daron Payne matters to this team almost as much as Jonathan Allen does, honestly, when you actually look at the film and the X's and O's behind everything. Again, Jonathan Allen has more accolades to his name, making the Pro Bowl and stuff like that, and that definitely plays a role in contract negotiations. So sadly for Daron Payne, and a good thing for the Commanders, is that they may not have to pay him as much as they're paying Jonathan Allen, because Daron Payne and his agent can't pull up and be like, see, Daron Payne has made the Pro Bowl this many times, he's led the league in sacks. That he can't do that. And remember, Daron Payne is only 25. He's still so young. This entire defensive line is so young. Jonathan Allen, I believe, is the oldest one on the defensive line. So far in 2022, Payne has played in all 7 games so far this season for the Commanders. Before this game against the Packers, he had 21 tackles, 5 tackles for loss, 3.5 sacks, 1 safety, and 3 pass deflections. Remember, that's like his specialty. I know FL Bada caught one off the helmet kind of by accident against the Bears, but when it comes to pass deflections from the defensive line, Daron Payne is literally the best at it on our defensive line, and not having him would definitely make a notable difference, because that's very impactful. That leads to interceptions. And again, he also has a safety himself. Pro Football Focus as of right now don't even have him ranked high. They feel like he's 68th out of 122 qualifying interior defensive linemen. So Pro Football Focus doesn't like him. They don't feel like he's worth a big contract. But I'm telling you, man, if you really watch it, in my opinion, I feel like he impacts this defense in a way that I love Fedarian Mathis. I love his potential, and he's going to be a great run stopper, a great double team eater, but he doesn't have that athleticism, that explosion, and that pass rush potential that Daron Payne has, where I still feel like he has some ceiling there that we can still untap. That there's some potential right there that we could just mold around and really turn him into a true monster, man. I'm telling you. I don't think we've seen the best Daron Payne yet. I mean, I think it's actually really interesting because Jonathan Allen, we thought he was really good, but he wasn't living up to the expectations that we had when we drafted him. But as soon as we paid him, he had his best year in his NFL career. Maybe Daron Payne is the same way. Normally people have their best year in their final year of their contract year, because they're trying to do everything they can to go get paid. But Jonathan Allen, instead, once we paid him, gave him his big time money, now he can rest easy, he's good. That's when he went out there and had his best season. Maybe Daron Payne happens to be the same way. Maybe just Alabama defensive tackles, once you pay them the money, once they see the money, they're more motivated to go out there and ball. So I feel like no matter what, we haven't seen the best Daron Payne yet. So whether we pay him long term or another team pays him long term big money, I think Daron Payne is going to definitely jump onto the scene and be one of the premier defensive tackles in the NFL. I really do feel so. I already felt so just naturally, because again, he's very athletic. I don't feel like he's scratched his ceiling yet. But at the same time, after seeing what Jonathan Allen did after getting paid, I think Daron Payne can do a similar thing. Also, Daron Payne currently has played a career high 85% of snaps for the Commanders Commanders right now. And it's just like, after a guy like that, you lose him, who's gonna make up for all of those snaps? Now, granted, we do have a lot of defensive line depth. Even after letting Matt Ioannidis and Tim Settle go, these defensive linemen in the back end are actually playing really well. Daniel Wise is stepping up. Of course, the edge rushers and F.A. Obata and Casey Toohill, James Smith-Williams is stepping up as well. But interior defensive line wise, Daniel Wise is stepping up. Fedarian Mathis looked like he was going to be a problem before he got hurt. John Ridgeway, we basically signed him to be like a Fedarian Mathis replacement, the double team eater, the run stuffer, but a guy that doesn't provide much pass rush potential. Basically just a nerfed off-brand Fedarian Mathis almost, but he's been playing decently well. F.A. Obata technically is an edge rusher, but he also can play interior defensive line as well. He's huge for our defensive line depth. I remember James Smith-Williams when we drafted him, and even though he's technically our starting defensive end opposite of Montez Sweat right now while Chase Young is out, he's also a guy that can play defensive end and interior defensive lineman, defensive tackle. 5 tech, 3 tech, whatever you need James Smith-Williams to do, he can go out there and do it. He may not be the best at it, but he can hold it down. So we have a lot of defensive line depth, but at the same time, none of these guys are Daron Payne. Outside of Daron Payne and Jonathan Allen, when you look at the interior defensive line depth, yeah, we have some guys that are good, and maybe together as a whole, they can produce enough to where our defensive line is still one of the elite ones in the NFL. But you go from the best front four in the NFL while you have Daron Payne to maybe top 10 defensive line in the NFL without Daron Payne. I feel like he has that much of an impact, honestly. Love our depth. Can't wait for Chase Young to come back and all of those guys. And I'm not saying Daron Payne is the most important part of our defensive line, but he definitely is important. I feel like just because Jonathan Allen, Montez Sweat, and Chase Young are so talented and so productive, I mean, kind of excluding Chase Young right now, I feel like people think that Daron Payne is easily replaceable. Well, I mean, maybe we would still be straight. Maybe our defense is still really good without Daron Payne. Maybe we're still winning games without Daron Payne. But our defensive line is not the best in the NFL without Daron Payne, without any of these guys. You remove Jonathan Allen, even with Chase Young healthy, we're not the best defensive line in the NFL. And right now, statistically, we're the best defensive line as far as getting to the quarterback without blitzing in the NFL right now, even without Chase Young. Imagine when Chase Young gets back. And that's why I don't want to lose Daron Payne, because I want to see all 4 of our true starters, including Chase Young, Montez Sweat, Jonathan Allen, Daron Payne, on the field at the same time before I make any sudden decisions. And Rivera even spoke on the situation. When asked about it October 21st, Rivera called Daron Payne a solid, stout football player, and he said that he and Jonathan Allen have been a really good tandem. It's really hard to mess up that chemistry and expect somebody else to be able to step up in their place. I mean, granted, Fedarian Mathis is another Alabama defensive tackle. You would think he'd be able to just plug in and do the same thing, but again, it's 2 completely different types of defensive tackles. Jonathan Allen and Daron Payne are both good against the run and can rush the passer. You could argue Fedarian Mathis is probably better against the run than those guys, but he's definitely nowhere near the pass rusher of those guys. They're both dual threat, no matter the down, 1st and 10, 2nd and 2, 2nd and 30, they have the answer. Whereas Fedarian Mathis is more so, you know, short yardage situations, more so obvious run situations. And Fedarian Mathis is going to be fun because he could be like a nose tackle if we want to run 5 defensive linemen with Jonathan Allen, Daron Payne as 3 techs, and Chase Young and Montez Sweat all the way out wide. You can even possibly even run a wide 9 with Chase Young if you want to. We can get creative with Fedarian Mathis in the middle, but Fedarian Mathis doesn't replace Daron Payne. They are not the same players, my point. Ron Rivera even spoke about on whether or not Daron Payne has a long-term future in Washington. He said, quote, "I like to think so," unquote. Payne is playing on the final year of his contract. Ron believes in the value of interior linemen on defense, but of course the money may get a little tight with Montez Sweat, and that's Pete Haley talking as far as outside of the quote. Rivera also said that he's seen a difference in the D-line's production over the last 2 weeks. He's seen growth in the entire group. They're running their stunts more efficiently and getting vertical. And stunts take chemistry, man. That takes a lot of veteran development. That takes a lot of practice, a lot of snaps, a lot of reps. That's more mental than anything. And again, you remove Daron Payne from the chemistry. How long does that set us back on the defensive line before the other guys catch up and can at least learn how to do stunts as well as Jonathan Allen and Daron Payne have been doing, especially with the guys next to him, because usually when you stunt, it's the defensive tackle with the edge rusher. So that means James Smith-Williams, when Chase Young comes back, and Montez Sweat, they're gonna have to figure out how to get that chemistry back together if you get rid of a Daron Payne one way or another. And we're just finally starting to click there, you know what I'm saying? man. That's one of the main reasons our defensive line has been so effective and so dominant so far this season. You can argue it's been the best front four in the NFL, and it's not just talent. There were a lot of gap responsibility issues last year that we were struggling with. The guys not knowing their role, not performing their role, not staying disciplined in their gaps. And not only have we solved that, but now we finally almost perfected the stunt game. And again, that's something that's chemistry. That's something you got to learn over time from playing with and next to each other for so long. Remove Daron Payne. How long does it take for us to get that back? Even ignoring the difference in talent. But now let's get to the fun part, man, because I mean, you have people out here going all the way back to October 13th. Remember when we were 1-4 saying that the Commanders need to be sellers, and people were writing articles about how the Commanders really need to figure out a way to get William Jackson and Daron Payne off the team for whatever value they can get. Again, this was back when we were 1-4. Things have changed. We still have a good chance of actually for real making the playoffs this season. The season is not over now that we're 3-4. And honestly, heading into this Colts game, I'm not trying to be cocky or arrogant, but we should have the advantage going into that game. It's honestly going to be a disappointment if we don't beat the Colts, especially with them making the change from Matt Ryan to Sam Ehlinger starting his first NFL game of his NFL career. So we should be 4-4, which puts us right back into it. Now, granted, NFC East wise, we're still in last place by quite a margin, but wild card wise, that should be pretty straight. But again, back when we were 1-4, everybody and their mama was writing articles about how we need to just go ahead and be big time sellers at the trade deadline. I mean, Pro Football Rumors wrote an entire article of how we can go ahead and just dump off Daron Payne and William Jackson in separate trades to other teams to get draft picks and to build for the future. NFL.com's Kevin Patra wrote an article of who should be buyers or sellers at the trade deadline. Of course, we were in the sellers category, but this is back when we were 2-4 after we beat the Bears. He talks about how Ian Rappaport, Mike Garafolo, and Tom Pelissero reported that William Jackson wants a fresh start. Now we're starting to hear from William Jackson himself that that's not necessarily the case, but he still isn't playing. Apparently he has a back issue. Still don't necessarily believe it, but it is what it is. We got to see what's going on. But he says that the biggest fish instead of William Jackson could actually be Daron Payne. If the Commanders don't believe they can bring him back, a contender could use an interior wrecker who already has 20 pressures this season, and this is through the first 6 games. And then Bleacher Report did a top 10 big board for the trade block, like the best players that should be or could be available for trade before the trade deadline. Daron Payne was number 10 and William Jackson was number 4. So apparently we have 2 top players that if a Super Bowl contender really wants to make a real Super Bowl push this season, those are 2 players out of 10 that you should really look at if you need one. If you need a man cover corner that can shadow the opponent's best receiver, you got a William Jackson. If you need an interior defensive lineman that could also rush the passer, and that's pretty rare to find, honestly, you got that in Daron Payne. And then there was a Cowboys analyst that said maybe the Commanders could trade Daron Payne and William Jackson to the Cowboys for a nice little package. He does point out the fact that Washington and Dallas don't necessarily make trades with each other, though. They're bitter rivals. That's very rare. We'll pick up each other's players off of free agency, but for me to trade it directly to you, like for us to actually conduct business together, definitely not, type of thing. So that's why it's very unlikely. But in his article, and this is all the way back October 18th, before any of this news about Daron Payne could go for a day 2 pick, he referred to heavy.com saying that Jackson could also be worth a day 2 pick. So maybe you can get a second for Daron Payne and a third for William Jackson. Maybe the 2 together get you a first. I don't know. But he does bring up a good point that both of those guys are technically rentals. I mean, Daron Payne again is on the last year of his contract, making a little over $8 million right now. So to pay a guy $8 million right now, 1 year rental, giving up potentially a second or third round pick for him is a little tricky for the buyer side, whether it's the Cowboys or whoever. And even The Athletic came out with an article from Ben Standig himself, October 21st. He reported that the Commanders are thinking about what they could do around this trade deadline. Rivera said, quote, "We've been talking since last week about potential scenarios, what could and what couldn't be." And at the time we were 2-4, and so Rivera was basically pondering the idea of should they be buyers and try to go all in for this season, or should they be sellers and try to get rid of guys and trade for whatever value you can get for the guys we've been talking about, Daron Payne, William Jackson, and maybe some other names. Right now it looks like we're kind of in the middle. We don't want to go out there and put all our eggs in one basket like we're a Super Bowl contenders this year, and I agree we should not be buyers right now at all. But at the same time, maybe we could be sellers with William Jackson because it just seems like the scheme, it just doesn't fit them. And Benjamin St-Juste and Rashad Wildgoose are stepping up big time anyway for cheaper. And you're probably just going to end up drafting a corner to replace Kendall Fuller at some point this offseason anyway. You know how much cap space that creates for us? Moving on from Kendall Fuller, William Jackson, and Carson Wentz. That's almost $50 million in cap space that we gained back from getting rid of those guys. So that's money to pay Daron Payne, Chase Young, and Montez Sweat potentially. Maybe you could throw Cam Curl in there for relatively cheap, Cole Holcomb for relatively cheap. So who knows how all of that can go. But again, I think we're just going to pretty much stay put. Maybe William Jackson gets moved, but I highly doubt Daron Payne gets moved. But my point is, you either have a plan in place to pay Daron Payne some type of verbal commitment to pay him long term, whether it be before the end of this season or as soon as the off season starts or something like that. Get him signed long term, or just trade him before the trade deadline. So hopefully you know something before the trade deadline comes up, because again, the most value you're going to get in return for Daron Payne is to trade him before the trade deadline. After that, you're getting less value, or you're going to potentially let him walk for free. And then best case scenario, he gets a huge contract somewhere else and we get a third round compensatory pick for him. If you can get a second for him, if you do not have like a definitive plan to pay him long term, if you're kind of on the edge, like we're going to try, but we don't know, you might as well just go ahead and trade him, because you don't want to risk just getting nothing back in return. Again, at the best, a third round pick when you could potentially get a second, maybe even a first right now. But honestly, even worse than that is trading them for very little value right now. Trading them for a third rounder or less at this point is almost pointless. You might as well at least keep them for the remainder of this season and see what we can do trying to make the playoffs and stuff like that, rather than that. I think worst case scenario is trading them for anything fourth round pick or less right now. That's literally the worst thing they can do. But again, you're taking a bit of a risk. You're kind of swimming with the sharks, trying to stall to see if we may end up paying them long term, when the best time to trade them, if you're gonna trade them, if you're not gonna pay them long term, literally the best option is to trade them before this trade deadline, before November. The trade deadline is literally November 1st, 4 p.m. We gotta watch that day, man. That's 7 days away, y'all. Things could get really tricky, man. But yeah, man, that's the end of this video. Please get in the comment section. Let me know how you feel about everything discussed in this video. What do you want to do? Do you want to trade Daron Payne before the trade deadline? Or do you love him so much that even if we aren't able to keep him long term, do you at least want him to ride out the rest of this season for us to potentially make the playoffs? And then maybe you try to talk contract stuff in the off season, maybe, and hope that we're one of the teams that offers him the most money, or for some reason he's willing to take less money and stay with us. I don't know. What's your strategy? How do you feel like the Commanders should handle it? Also, appreciate all the support, man. Shouts out to all of my sponsors, especially my Pro Bowl sponsors whose names you see scrolling on the screen right now. Please leave a like on this video if you liked it, if you learned anything. And as always, man, again, I appreciate y'all. I'll catch y'all later. I'm out.